Hi, this is the third Notes and Accords live stream, and I hope you're as excited as I am because this is one of my favorite notes in perfume. I have a lot of fragrances that feature tobacco. And what's great about the tobacco note, like many others, is that it has so many different. It's not a monolithic note. There are just so many different ways that tobacco can be interpreted. Some of the more obvious ways would be much like the smell of cigarettes or pipe tobacco or cigars. It can go into so many different directions. It could be a very dry, spicy, acrid kind of tobacco. It can be peppery. It could be fruity. It can evoke dried fruit. Or it can also be very coumarinic, meaning it has those aspects of tonka and hay, which is what I would call an adjacent type of note. We can talk more about note adjacency. Or it can go into a very damp and chewy and deep and rich direction. There's just so much to explore with this note. And in perfumery, it has existed as a concept almost as long as modern perfumery itself, at least if we're talking about modern perfumery at the turn of the 20th century. So I'm going to check out the chat here, and we have Nikki B. Wonderful to see you. I'm glad that you could join us. Hi, Bilbo. Great to have you here, and great to see you as well, Pat Lester. We have 14 people who are tuned in. I think this would be a good opportunity to ask some of those who are tuned in, what is your favorite tobacco-forward fragrance? I'd like to hear what your favorite or your favorites are, and I'll let you know if some of them will be featured in this stream. Like all of the Notes and Accords streams, we're going to begin the first hour, or start with the first hour by discussing the raw materials, starting with the naturals and then moving on to the synthetics. And depending upon the time, we'll enter the second hour to share some of my tobacco fragrances, or most of the ones that heavily feature tobacco. We have Nick S. here. Evening all, scent of the day was Mugler. Cologne, scent of the evening is Creed Bois de Portugal. Excited for this stream as I don't know much about tobacco and fragrance. Well, I'm just as excited, and I'm glad that you are. Manly Scents, wonderful to see you as well. And I know that you do enjoy good tobacco and fragrance as much as I do. 17 people tuned in. Let me know, what is your favorite tobacco fragrance? Or what are some of your favorites? You can list a few, or you can list a lot. Let's hear from everyone. Or you can even mention your scent of the evening, scent of the day, like Nick S. did. And we're just going to allow a little bit of time for more people to file in before we get things started and begin talking about the raw materials that are used by the perfumer. We have 20 people who are tuned in now. Wonderful to see that amount. If you look at the the pinned comment, I do have a whole other set of goodies that I would like to give to folks who contribute via Buy Me a Coffee. If you purchase 12 coffees, that is $5 each. I am continuing to do my offer of a 4 full bottle grab bag plus a generous assortment of samples. So the link is in that pinned comment. It will take you right to Buy Me a Coffee. It's easy to make a contribution. And I just sent out a number of them last week, and I'm happy to hear the feedback on their goodies. We have that in line over here. We have that. It's queued up. We'll be talking about the Dreamer during our discussion. And we have S. Bogdan. Hi, my favorite tobacco fragrance is Atmanzaman Lorenzo Villaresi. I love it. So do I. I have that over here. We'll be talking about that one. Veni Hava from Les Indemadables is my favorite, says Pat Lester. Very nice. Tobacco Reserve. I'm assuming you mean the Aramis. I do have that lined up here as well for us to chat about. We have Scott Beer here. Hello there. Tobacco faves, Aramis Havana, Naxos, and even though it's vetiver forward, I love the tobacco in Guerlain vetiver. Very good choice. Not many people think of Guerlain vetiver as a tobacco forward fragrance, and it is in fact brimming with tobacco. It could very well be named vetiver and tobacco because there are equal amounts, I would say, of both the vetiver and the tobacco. Manly Sense here, not strictly tobacco frags, but Polo Green comes to mind, and I love the fresh tobacco Intrusati L'Uomo. Very nice. We have 24 people who are now tuned into the live. We're about 6.5 minutes in, and I think now is as good a time as any because we have a lot of materials to discuss. We're going to start off with the raw materials, and you may be surprised by some of the materials that might be used to put together a tobacco note, an accord in a fragrance. I have a box. Bringing this over here. I have a box of some naturals here. We're going to go over first. We're going to move on to some synthetics. There are many different synthetics that can be used to help build, extend, enhance a tobacco in a fragrance, but I'm only going to be going over a significant handful of them because if I were to go through all of them during this stream, it would take hours. But the naturals, however, we can probably go through most of them here. But I think that this is a good opportunity to turn it to the viewers here and to those who are in the chat. Let's see if you can name some of the materials that would be used, the natural materials that would be used in building a tobacco note and accord in a perfume. We have Jean-Claude Saint. Michi, hi. I just sprayed my sample of Divinifant from ELO, created by Antoine Lee. It is neroli, baby powder, coffee, tobacco, and leather on me. Lovely. Versace Man was a good modern tobacco as well. Good choice. And we have Fernando tuning in here. Great to see you, my friend. So, my question to the folks who are tuned in, what are some of the natural materials that come to mind when building a tobacco note or accord in a perfume? I'd love to hear some of your answers. And as we get some correct answers, I'll start pulling them out if I have them right here. And we have a good amount of them right here. Coumarin being one of them. We'll talk a little bit more about coumarin as a synthetic, but that would be a good opportunity to talk about tonka being absolute. Hay absolute as well. Hay is an adjacent note, just like tonka bean is an adjacent note to tobacco. Myrrh is another great choice in enhancing a tobacco accord, and so is cedar. Cedar is so versatile, and it works great as a modulation for so many different notes and accords, including tobacco. Michi also mentions hay, and Andre Iovan. Let's not forget Bois d'Ambouille by Ode Tali. We have that over here, and we'll be talking about that one a little bit later. And tobacco absolute, of course. Why don't we start with that? And you will find some of the folks who are tuned in will find this rather interesting. Tobacco absolute is used in building tobacco accords, but it isn't used nearly as much as you think. And in fact, in creating the impression or the illusion of tobacco, often tobacco absolute is not present at all. But in a number of cases it is. And I actually have 3 different tobacco absolutes. And I'm going to reach for those here. Let me make sure I have all of them. Sorry for all the clinging and banging in this box that I have. All right, I have 3 of them that I'm going to take out here. And the first one is a Virginia tobacco absolute, Virginiana, Nicotiana tabacum, maybe that's pronounced. This is Virginian tobacco. Nikki, that's another good one. We'll be talking about that one soon. And we have Andy the Frenchie answering the question, often in accord with cloves and pimento berries. We have a great example of a perfume a little bit later, as far as cloves and pimento berries, otherwise known as allspice. Baroli, great to see you as well. Andy the Frenchie, I'm glad to see you as well in the chat. I don't think I've seen you in the chat before. You're a good fella and a great reviewer. Sort of a kindred spirit of mine. I love your reviews on Base Notes and Fragrantica. Paroli, sorry about that. My regards to you as well. Much love to you. As an ex-smoker, Fumery Turk is probably the closest I found to unsmoken tobacco. We have that one lined up as well. Manly Sense. I was never the biggest fan of Aramis Havana, but it's much more pleasant than Roger and Galaise Open, which both of them are over here. Yes, Fille de Tabac. We have that over here. Indeed. As long as you're here, even if you're not an active participant. But I love to see you as an active participant because I think you'd have a lot of great things to say and being a participant. Nikki mentions Immortelle. Dog tongue. Do you think, were you actually did you mean deer tongue? I do have deer tongue over here. Leatrice. We'll talk about that a little bit soon. You're naming all of them. All right, let's talk about these tobacco absolutes here. Nick S. Base Notes crew representing. I love it. Love that I'm getting some of the Base Notes folks over here. Great people over there. Insightful, intelligent, curious fragrance enthusiasts. I'm glad that they're tuning in. We have 25 people who are tuned in here. Let's talk about these tobacco absolutes. Let's get started with that. So with the Virginia tobacco, it's a very dry, almost kind of reminding me of like old rope. Interesting, strange, like dark chocolate cake, like devil's food cake with this wet, juicy, luscious, rich kind of cherries. It kind of gives me like if anybody has had the pleasure of going into a tobacco shop and opening up one of those apothecary jars of loose pipe tobacco and you smell a cherry tobacco, it is utter heaven. And tobacco Virginia reminds me very much of that. And for my notes, I had analyzed this as having a dry out that's sort of like a baked earth, woody, nutty, powdery. It's really a remarkable material. And in my notes, it was on the smelling strip for 6 whole days. Very tenacious material. That's one of them. We have another one. It is a burley tobacco. And burley tobacco is what I described as warm, masculine, rich, interesting facets. Like, you have the tonka bean sweetness. You have this sort of like this caramel toffee kind of thing going on. And also, of course, you have those distinctly aggressive, textured kind of undertones, if you will. Just gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. Very earthy. Now, mind you, when perfumers are using these, they're not using dollops of these absolutes because they're very tenacious, very strong, very dense. Next, we have Oriental tobacco, and this is another variation. Just wow. This is much more hay-like, much more woody. Just packs a real punch. A little bit more animalic. Dry. It's like sort of astringent. Cedary. And there's a cedariness to it as well. Kind of musty, but musty, when we say musty, we don't mean it in a negative way. We like a little bit of mustiness because it triggers some of those memories in our brain of certain spaces and environments, maybe from our youth, from our childhood, of mystery and something ominous or just, when we're adventurous, when we're a child, digging through an attic or a cellar or an old house, maybe an abandoned house. Lovely, lovely stuff. And there is that powdery sweetness as well in the dry down. So those are the three. I do have a blonde tobacco as well here. This is a fourth one. Wonderfully, it's like more sheer. It's an interesting because it's a natural that reminds me of a synthetic that we're going to be talking about. It's much more bright, grassier, woodier. That's blonde tobacco. So these are all Nicotiana tabacum. They're all different botanical varieties. So those are 4 of them. Now, we're going to get back to the chat here. All of the tobacco absolutes that I have here were purchased from Hermitage Oils a while back. I do have one here from Liberty Naturals. And that's where I purchased these particular ones. Famous YouTuber, hello, Duncan. Gianfranco Fairforman has a nice tobacco. Scott Breer says, musty can be great, reminders of a vintage bookshop or library. Great pairing with tobacco scents. Next, now that we have those aside, why don't we talk about some other naturals? And then some, according to some opinions, actually are preferred over the tobacco absolutes because they're a little bit less complex and complicated and maybe easier to work with, but absolutely beautiful materials. One of them, Nikki had mentioned earlier, this is called Leatrix. And Leatrix, you may be familiar with Leatrix because of deer tongue, which is a very common plant that is grown in gardens. It's shaped like a spire with purple flowers. And there is a certain variety that is used that is quite fragrant and very high in. Nikki, you are very knowledgeable, so I'm gonna ask that you allow somebody who's probably a little bit more of a novice on this. Can somebody guess what chemical component Leatrix would be high in? Think about something that we've mentioned earlier. If somebody in the chat can guess this question, the answer to this question, what chemical component in Leatrix? What is it very high in? Let's see if somebody can answer. But in the meantime, I'm going to open this up and enjoy it. Yeah, so Leatrix is some beautiful stuff. Some aspects of lavender absolute, very hay-like. I'm going to try to avoid giving the answer while I describe this, but just rich and earthy. Raisin aspects. And there's an aspect of it that reminds me almost of like baklava. If you inhale the aroma while eating baklava. Very, very sophisticated stuff. Wonderful stuff. Because I know you know the answer. Because a lot of these have the same answer, actually. Regis Munton, will you talk about when tobacco is combined with hay and black pepper? We'll see what transpires here. They often are paired with hay and black pepper, as I was mentioning earlier in the chat, in the conversation, that hay is it's an adjacent note to tobacco. And it's because of this chemical component that is plentiful in both. If somebody can give me the answer to this chemical component, because it will also give me a great segue to the next natural material. Chocolate-covered raisins and a Russian oud. Can anybody answer me? What is this chemical component that you're going to find in plenitude with a lot of these materials that lend a tobacco feel? Going to give it a little bit of time. We have 27 people tuned in. What is this chemical component? I know Nikki is dying to give the answer. He knows it. He knows it. And I know that he knows it, But one of you who are a little bit new to perfume and perfume, not necessarily perfume, but perfume materials and perfume chemistry, try to take a stab at it. Ding, ding, ding. Scott, yes, coumarin. Coumarin, exactly. Coumarin is that chemical component. Now, if I can have another person answer this question. What material... Oh, Fernando just saved me the trouble. That material, tonka. Okay. Now, I don't know if I have my tonka material here. No, I don't have that here. However, we'll chat about tonka a little bit here because it is really relevant, because tonka bean is often paired with tobacco because of that coumarin and because of that hay-like quality, because tonka itself has tobacco-like qualities to it. And in a little bit with the synthetics, I'm going to show you some pure coumarin. It looks like somebody, it looks like something somebody would use if they're feeling a little hedonistic. And it's in a crystalline form. Now, another material that is beautiful and a little bit less known than the ones that we have already mentioned is fleuve. Fleuve absolute. Fleuve is another plant material. Wow, I love the smell of fleuve. And fleuve is buttery. It's like a buttery type of feel to it. It's vegetative, raw, earthy. Interesting kind of like cola nuance to it. Really tenacious. Still has that coumarin, but it has a lot of this character to it. Lesser known, lesser used. Doesn't come up often enough as a note, but I'll tell you something. It's often there. This and the Liatrix is often there when we see a tobacco note. People are less familiar with fleuve and Liatrix than they are obviously with tobacco. But some perfumers do choose to list it as a note, and that's kind of cool when I do see it come up as a note. Either one of them. Sweet Milk, welcome, my friend. Sweet Milk says, I've been looking for tobacco fragrance. It's not sweet. I tried Journeyman and Memoir Man, but I want more tobacco. We're going to be talking about a lot of tobacco a little bit later. And don't call me bro. Okay, and here is the hay. Hay. We were mentioning hay earlier. We know that hay is going to be used in a lot of tobacco accords. And in French, it's called flancoup. And in fact, in the early to mid 20th century, early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century, Flan Fraîchement Coupe was a popular, refreshing cologne or fragrance. Fresh mown hay or new mown hay. So before we really see the presence of tobacco as a note or an accord in perfumery, we had hay. This is from France. France grows a lot. France actually distills a lot of hay for perfumery in Grasse, France. So to get into hay a little bit as a material, we know some of the obvious things about hay, and that it evokes that smell of the hay bales, the straw bales. There's like a very, very bright top notes to it, but it's very deep and also coumarinic and grassy and weedy and tobacco-like and dried fruit-like. So hay. That's another. Oh, a blend 30. I'm sure you don't think it's bland 30. It's gorgeous stuff. Dunhill Blend 30 is just a magical fragrance. It really is sort of a sui generis of fragrances. There's nothing quite like it, and it's sad that it is so scarce and so difficult to locate. It had been out of production for such a long time, and it has some remarkable aspects to it. I didn't set that aside because I feel like tobacco and hay are just more so hay, like you say. It has sort of a supporting role in it, but gorgeous stuff. Andy the Frenchie got a chance to try Blend 30 from a base noter. That's one wonderful way of describing it. It is astonishing. Precious liquid. It's a precious liquid. I put it in my special reserve box. Keep it out of harm's way. Is there something online that suggests that it has 30 notes to it? That's a whole interesting topic in itself as far as notes, because notes are more abstract than the materials. I'm sure there could be more than 30 materials that were used to compose it, or there could have been less, but it is a very complex fragrance, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But I wasn't aware that the 30 actually referred to the amount of notes. That is true, Sweet Milk. My pal Andy the Frenchie from Fragrantica and Base Notes is here. So we talked about Fleuve, we talked about hay, we talked about Leatrix. Beautiful materials, beautiful natural materials that can be used in composing a tobacco fragrance. Let me see if I have any other naturals here that we can talk about. I think that now is a good time as any to actually segue into the liminal space between natural and synthetic. And to start off with that, we will get into something called, and for those of you who were tuned into my Amber live stream, I discussed it at that time, so I'll reiterate some of the things that I chatted about during that stream, how they apply to tobacco, in this case, amberome, which is a fractional distillation of labdanum produced by Cinnarome. And there is one type of tobacco fragrance that uses a fair amount of amberome, and that is Tobacco Oud by Tom Ford. In fact, to me, Tobacco Oud is really, it really showcases amberome. To me, it is just the centerpiece of Tobacco Oud is amberome. So that can lend a tobacco quality. It can bring out some of the aspects of tobacco amberome. If you want me to hear me, babble a little bit more about amberome, check out the Amber Notes and Accords live stream from last month for that. Next, this may come as a surprise to some folks. Clary Sage. Nikki was mentioning this earlier. Actually, Paroli, now that you mention it, there's even more amberome in Tobacco Oud Intense. It is total amberome bomb. Woo! Glad you enjoy the reviews on the Gantica. Yeah. Oh, there's a mystery 30th note that they're not listing. Fragrantica isn't always accurate. We've had these discussions before too, so there's some things that could be not really properly represented there. Back to the discussion on Clary Sage, though. Clary Sage. This is a Clary Sage Absolute. We've talked about the difference between Absolute and essential oil in previous discussions, with this being a solvent extraction of the raw material versus a distillation of the oil through a different process. So this brings out a lot of more of the fragrant materials in that botanical material in that plant than the essential oil does. And it's remarkable because clary sage is just such an interesting and complex material. But when you smell it, you can see where it would be used in creating a tobacco note, because it has a lot of these head notes that you're not going to find in those tobacco absolutes or even the other natural materials that I've just been discussing. It's just these head notes, these more herbal aromatic head notes that are found in clary sage absolute. And it's just herbaceous, it's sharp, there is a tenacity to it. It is a great way of bridging, say if you have an opening of spices and citrus and bridging it to the rest of the tobacco in a fragrance. And to me, there are certain aspects of it that remind me of the smell of like just a very beautiful, fragrant, aromatic pack of cigarettes when you first open them, unlit. That smell, including like the carton or whatever you call it, the soft pack or hard pack. It smells like that to me. It's really cool. The essential oil as well. We have the essential oil. Much more of a top note, much more tea-like, works wonderfully in composing tobacco or fleshing it out. So those are all the naturals. And is everybody ready for the synthetics? We have 27 people tuned in. Regis Moncton says, I believe that the trio tobacco hay black pepper is used in something like the Irish Spring scent profile. And when Mosa is added, it's like the honey and lilac scent profile. And Duncan says they use dry ice and liquid nitrogen to get marijuana extracts. Extrait. I wonder if they try that in perfumery. Dry ice is not used in extracting raw materials. There is something, the most common solvent that is used in botanical absolutes is hexane. Hexane is used, and you use the hexane to draw from a concrete from the raw plant material, and then it's distilled down to the absolute. And absolutes can be anything from liquid to semi-liquid to solid, sometimes very solid and very unctuous or sticky. Hi there, Just Add Light. Great to have you here. Beauty. There's some hazardous stuff there. Hexane is relatively safe in comparison. What are they using in Atmanzaman? Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I have some ideas. I don't have the GCMS for Lorenzo Villaresi's Atmanzaman, so some of it is just guessing, observation, what I detect. But we'll get into it a little bit when we start talking about the individual perfumes. We have fragrance enthusiasts here. Where is Marge? I am not her keeper. I don't know what happened to her, where she is. I think she's taking a hiatus. Good for her. Yes, it is. I know we've had discussions about that, Andy, about it being a great composition. Yes, Immortelle. And real tobacco, absolute. Exact. There you go. Okay. Now, getting to the synthetics, some of which I actually have in here. We'll start off with the most obvious one. Remember, I was mentioning coumarin. So, tonka bean absolute can be found in a lot of our favorite fragrances in small quantities. It is more expensive than if we were to use coumarin. These are the crystals, coumarin crystals. And here they are. Yeah, it's kind of hard to show them, but we have crystals in here. You can hear them though. So the coumarin crystals, they are dissolved in a solvent, alcohol, or some other type of solvent. And coumarin is used so everywhere in perfume. And of course, it is going to be present in a lot of tobacco fragrances. Next, we have some interesting ones to discuss and some that are less predictable. We have one here called Zingerone. This is Zingerone. This is, I have the neat crystals of zingerone here. We'll talk a little bit about zingerone. It's spicy. It's phenolic. Duncan, do you remember the word phenolic? Can you tell me what phenolic means? We had a little lesson on phenolic, but this is phenolic. Gingery, hence zingerone. It's vanillic, it's woody, and it is a sweetener. It is a way of sweetening, spicing up, warming up tobacco. Used in more spicy tobacco accords. I wouldn't be surprised if it was used in Fille de Tabac by Miller Harris. It's very attractive stuff. It's also recommended to be paired with castoreum and labdanum, lifting each of those. So the zingerone, that's the next raw material. There's some cool ones here. We have one that is called the asparane. The asparane. It's fresh, tea-like. That tea is another note that has some adjacency. Think about it. Dried, cured leaves from an aromatic plant. Tea-like, tobacco-like, woody, fruity, berry. Very powerful stuff. I don't want to open it and sniff it. But that's another one, the asparane. Next is something called Cabanon. Love this stuff. Oh, it's actually not this vial, though. Oh, here it is. It's Cabanon. That's the vial. And if you want to have an elevation in a composition, the top notes that you would never get from the tobacco absolutes, you wouldn't be able to get them from coumarin, you wouldn't be able to get them from on any of those naturals, no liatris, none of the hay. This is just the top notes. Very, it's very. There's a treble and there is a bass to it as well. It's balsamic, spicy. It's used in traces up to 1%, and that's a very high amount to use in a composition. And to me, this really does smell like raw tobacco leaves. Gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. One of my favorite materials out of all the materials that I have. That is called Cabanon, and that is produced by Symrise, Symrise. All right, back to the chat here. For just a moment, we're going to dive back into the discussion on the synthetics. Tobacco Reserve is a real unicorn now, unfortunately, very sadly, and it's lovely, lovely stuff. The impression of tobacco I like the least, to be honest, would be... I'm not getting the context, Andy. I apologize. The impression of so you're more into like this is the hyper realism kind of tobacco. Like get all that tobacco, gooey, rich, dense tobacco absolute kind of like. We have a few that we'll talk about that fall into that category that I know both you and I really appreciate, and Atman's Ammon is one of them. Tonkabacco, Tonkabacco. Although there are some cool early 20th century fragrances that are impression of tobacco that are very different from the Tonkabacco. And we know the whole Terry Mugler, all that. Never was a fan. I see Boz is here. Good to see you, Boz. Scott Bear says, would anything particularly green in terms of raw materials be utilized to convey uncured tobacco? Interestingly enough, very little. Maybe at the license of the perfumer, they may want to see to it that there is a little bit of greenness, a tiny trace of it. But if we were to push it more in a green direction, we may be veering into a different territory. Or what we might be doing is we might be juxtaposing. We might be juxtaposing a tobacco note with a greener note, where as opposed to the green contributing to tobacco, it is a juxtaposition. So I'm guessing that would be more the case, because most of the materials that I have very little in the way of green, because our association with tobacco is more so in the cured leaves than in those that are fresh off of the vine. I think it's a vine, or fresh off of the plant itself. Yes. Sweet Tonka is it to me. It's not really. Yeah. Ryan does put it best. Tonkabacco. It's not really tobacco. It's sort of I don't know. To me, it's this. I don't know. When I smell it, to me, it's more just like Tonka. Then they just put a tobacco note there to I guess bait and switch, make the person feel like it's tobacco. I have no clue, but they don't give me the true impression of tobacco. Most of those. We'll talk about the greenness of tobacco, the greenness that I think that you pick up. And it has a little something to do with clary sage. We actually have two fragrances we're going to talk about, which is more clary sage than actual tobacco. And that's one of them. All right. So quinolines, we were talking about quinolines or quinolines in the leather stream. They also are very useful in tobacco because there's some sort of like pitchy, trebly, pinchy, sharp tobacco quality to quinolines, like isobutylquinoline, 6-methylquinoline. The quinolines are very, they have a presence. They lift everything else up. They have that greenness. I guess you could say that if you do have a little bit of greenness going on, you're getting that from the quinolines. Like there's also dimethyl hydroquinone, which is similar to a quinoline, and that's kind of like a greener hay. Fennel, it's herbaceous, it's earthy, and then the 6-methylquinoline, the leatheriness, animalic. There's even like a little fecal undertone to it, and I think that some of this is in Tobacco Taboo, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I feel like I detect 6-methylquinoline in Tobacco Taboo from Parfum d'Empire, Marc-Antoine Corticchiato. Or Corticchiato. Is it Corticchiato? I always forget. Corticchiato. I had to think about it for a second. No problem, Scott. I've never found that one anywhere, so I'll take your word for it. I'm definitely interested in the greener aspects of tobacco. Yeah, that's worth exploring. I'm glad that you bring up the greenness, because we don't often think about that sort of greenness. It's definitely not a tobacco. It's not like a tomato leaf green. It's not a galbanum green. It's not a basil or an herbal green. It's a distinct kind of green. And I think, now that I'm talking about the quinolines, I think the quinolines can kind of give that sort of impression of the sharp greenness or verdancy of tobacco. Bois d'Ambry, Montabaco, Monsiage Aviation Club. To tell you the truth, Andy, I have not even tried Montabaco or Aviation Club. I am on a moratorium on trying any other tobaccos because I'm so impulse prone. I have like such a backlog of so many things that I want to, sample. Thank you so much, Andy, for clarifying. Yeah, I remembered after giving it some thought. This is me at the end of like a long work day, like Corticchiato. Yes, thank you. DS and Durga has a favorite of mine, cowboy grass notes, vetiver, clary sage and thyme, Regis Moncton, did you study perfumer's chemistry at school, or am I self-taught? I'm self-taught. I had some mentors, but I'm primarily self-taught. I was not in a school. I didn't go to Grass. I didn't go to, ISPCA. I didn't go to Art of an Olfaction or anything. I didn't. Yeah, I was all self-taught. Collected the materials, examined them, evaluated them, experimented with compositions. I spent a lot of time doing that a number of years ago, and I've put that on the back burner indefinitely because everything is fucking expensive, and I'm certainly not sure. I'm certain that I don't want to get into a very expensive hobby like perfume making right now. All right, so we talked about the quinolines, but there's also rose ketones. Ketones like damascones and damascenone. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have this one right here, which is a damascenone total. This is a Firmenich-produced damascenone, and damascenone is a spectacular material, just brimming with rose, blackcurrant, raisin, plum. It's rich, it's sheer, it's floral, but it is that sort of je ne sais quoi in tobacco. And as a matter of fact, in nature, damascenone is found in tobacco as well as in rose and black tea. So damascenone can be used to flourish and floralize or to make more aromatic and berry-like, because those are these subtle facets of tobacco that are present when you're smelling various types of tobacco leaves. We also have Delta Damascone. Strong stuff, but I can't help it. I love the way they smell. Whoa, so cool. So such unique character, the rose ketones. Damascone Delta is very blackcurrant, cassis-like, fruity, diffusive. It's used in trace amounts. Think of these materials are not poured into compositions. A little goes a long way. Very substantive materials. We're talking 0.1% in the final formula. So there's a rose tobacco effect here in dilution, appley aspects, earthy aspects, and then we have the other one, beta damascone, or damascone beta. And beta damascone is very powerful. This is used at 0.02% in the final formula. Very powerful, fruity, floral note. I wouldn't advise doing what I do, and I'm just opening the pure vial. I don't want to give myself anosmia, but I'm just hooked on the smell of rose ketones. It's just this one, beta damascone, is a complex odor of rose, plum, blackcurrant, wine, and tobacco. I do pick up this winey, kind of like a plum wine smell when I smell this undiluted. It smells like plum wine, like umishi plum. Gorgeous stuff. And of course, with coumarin, we're going to have coumarin derivatives. We're going to have lactones as well. It's interesting, So there is your vocabulary word, folks. We have 26 people tuned in. Who can tell me what a lactone is? What do you think a lactone would impart in a perfume? I'd like to hear an answer from somebody in the chat. And Aviation Club is hard to find. Hey, it's probably for the best because I don't want to go looking for it. Jonky Scent, I'd love to have it if the brand offers a travel size for Tabac Tabou. It's good that they have the smaller sizes, but I think even smaller quantities it would be nice for Perfumed Empire to offer. Scott Bear says, personally, I would love if Aramis Devon had a tobacco note. Even a slight one could be really good. I could see that working into Aramis Devon for sure. Milk? In a way, yes, but think of something else that's, when somebody says something's lactonic, We think milky, we think milk because of lactone, yes. But there's also another adjective. Can somebody mention the other adjective that can come to mind? Peachy milk, yes, when we're talking about certain lactones, the lactones that lend that quality to peach and apricot out of the many different lactones. But there's another word that I'm thinking of. It's different from milky. Milky has a certain connotation, but this other word sounds a little bit more pleasant. Let's see. Lactones are also ketones. They're not esters as far as I know, but my chemistry could be rough. Can somebody think of the other adjective that I'm thinking of? It's similar to milky, but it sounds nicer. It sounds a little nicer in describing it in a perfume. I know somebody out there can give the answer. And while I'm waiting, here you go, Mr. Scott Bear. Creamy. Yes, creamy. So lactones often do impart a creaminess, a roundness. Coumalactone, this is one of the lactones that are coumineric, hence the name. And coumalactone, I want to smell it here. When I open this up, I pick up a much more pronounced coumarinic quality to tobacco. They describe this as having a natural tobacco effect and a creamy, musky base to it. And it can be used to replace coumarin, but in much smaller amounts because it's much more substantive. It's kind of tasty. Let's see. And there's some other lactones. I don't have them all gathered here. Gamma valirolactone, heptalactone gamma, delta decalactone, heptalactone gamma. So that's what's interesting when you hear these decalactones. So we're thinking of the molecular. My chemistry's rough, but it's the amount of sides. So you have 10 sides on that particular molecule, and then you have 7 on the heptalactone gamma, and then it's wild stuff. I'm a little rusty on it, but I'd love to kind of dive into it a little bit more and talk about like the chains and it's just fascinating stuff, and how just subtle differences. You remove one chain, you remove one little leg, and it can change that whole profile of that raw material. Some other materials like cephalus or cephalus, I think this is pronounced cephalus. Cephalus is produced by Givaudan, and it's rich, warm, ambery tobacco. This is a booster for tobacco. If cedar has isoe super, tobacco has cephalus. Great with florals as well. Woody, aldehydic. Great sort of like masculinity to it. A lot of material. It's like I said, it's like isoe super is to cedar, cephalus is to tobacco rather. This is actually at least a semi-natural. This is produced by Simrise. This is palisandin. And the name originates from palisander, like palisander rosewood. It's woody, rosewood-like, cedarwood-like, amber, very earthy, beautiful kind of like forest floor kind of smell with notes of patchouli, even like an orris. This would harmonize so well with tobacco accords. This would make a great pairing with tobacco accords. Gorgeous material is palisandin from Simrise. And of course, we can revisit some of the naturals as well, others that complement tobacco, even though it's not necessarily essential to building a tobacco accord. We can think of things like olibanum, like the resin, or even this very cool olibanum serrata alcohol extracted absolute. This is a thick absolute from the Boswellia serrata resin. And it would just go so well with even if, especially if you want to impart that sort of smokiness to the tobacco without necessarily going down the road of literal smoke, without going down the road of very phenolic materials like cade or birch tar. There are things like sweet woodruff. Sweet woodruff is another plant that has a high coumarin content that when you crush the leaves, they smell a lot like tobacco, and not as easy to get as an absolute, but that can also be used. Sweet clover. This is a sweet clover absolute. Trèfle. Melilotus officinalis. This was produced in France. I got this from White Lotus Aromatics, which sadly is now out of business. They had some amazing natural materials that were available to the perfumer. This stuff is so good. It's just so dark and deep. It's just dense. All this dense clover. This would go wonderfully in a fougere as well. And I think I've pretty much exhausted all the natural and synthetic materials that I set aside to talk with you folks. Just want to make sure in case there may be something else I want to bring up here before we enter the second hour. And we're just going to talk about the fragrances themselves. I have some selections that I had set aside that are tobacco forward fragrances. And we'll talk about that in the next hour. Oh, sclareolide or sclareolide. This is a synthetic which has the feedstock of clary sage, Salvia sclaria. And sclareolide, I think, was actually used in Hermes H24, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't too head over heels over its use in that composition. I think it's a decent composition. It didn't really resonate with me enough to do anything with it. I had a sample. It was okay. And I moved on from it. But that's not to say sclareolide would not do some very interesting things in a composition, and I think that it's proven to have done that. It's very dry and woody, and it's papery, and there's even some ambergris to it, which I'll give you some interesting factoids on that too. And at 1%, this is intense, aromatic, woody, moss-like, with these cedar and tobacco nuances. And the reason why I meant, yeah, totally. And it smells kind of like a more natural smelling ambrox, if you can believe it. Now, the reason why I might want to mention ambergris is that clary sage can be used as a feedstock, not only for this, but also for ambroxan. And clary sage has also been used in other materials that are meant to impart ambergris, which is some fascinating stuff. You have this botanic material from this plant, this herb, that has certain qualities to it that are similar to that of ambergris. It's just a fascinating thing that to possibly explore is the unlikely similarities between the two. Going to go back to the chat. Dihydrocoumarin works in a tobacco accord. That's another one of, I didn't set that aside, but that was another one that I had on the list. Andy says, later on, could you tackle the tobacco flower white tobacco accord that Sharon likes to use in a couple of his fragrances? We could talk about a little bit of that in the second hour. For example, Boudica Woad, because tobacco flower is there's a little bit more poetic license with that. Tobacco flower does have its own aroma. And I wouldn't say that it has an aroma that somebody would immediately think of tobacco as far as tobacco leaves, but it is distinct in itself. White tobacco, on the other hand, yeah, I don't really know what is meant by white tobacco and the opium accord now that we're at it. If we have some time, maybe we can we can sort of bookend it. We can follow up on that. I'll star this. I'll put this comment as a star, and we'll revisit it later. Pheromone. Marilyn Miglin pheromone? I think Marilyn Miglin pheromone for men and women may have some sort of tobacco facets to it, if that's what you're actually referring to. Regis says, thanks for the video. I appreciate all this info. I'll refer to it for years to come. And it's my absolute pleasure. Sure thing. Claire, hi. No worries at all. You can watch the archive. The first hour had consisted of my going over all the raw materials, natural and synthetic. Scott says, recall having a German beer once that had sweet woodruff syrup added to it. Really interesting. Would love to experience it in fragrance. Last summer I was in Saratoga Springs, and I went to shop at a more upscale sort of supermarket there, and they had sweet woodruff flavored water, and it was delicious. It was kind of like drinking sort of like a tonka beanish flavored water. It was kind of refreshing. And Claire says woodruff is used as a flavoring in German desserts. Yes, and the sweet woodruff water, apparently, according to the bottle, it was sort of a traditional thing to be drunk in Germany. So that makes sense. All right, so I'll be back in just a bit, folks. The second hour, we're going to talk about the tobacco fragrances that I have lined up here. So back in a moment. And welcome back. This is the second hour of the Notes and Accords Tobacco live stream. I'm going to be packing up some of these synthetics here and naturals, storing those back. And we're going to talk about some of the tobacco perfumes and fragrances, whatever you want to call them, smelly things. All right. But this is going to involve some viewer participation. Yes, my friend, that was an intermission. I am known for my intermissions. It's a palate cleanser. It's an opportunity for me to take a little breath and collect my thoughts. So I'm making sense to the viewer, and it gives you folks an opportunity to just kind of reflect on what we were talking about or go on a bathroom break, whatever. Yeah, I like the intermissions. So, my first question to you all is, what is one of the earliest fragrances to draw on the concept of tobacco that had become famous? And bonus points for the perfumer who composed said fragrance. That's right. It is. Cigarette break. There you go. Very clever. Love it. Guerlain Vetiver? Guerlain Vetiver? Oh, you know what? I should actually bring my Guerlain Vetiver. Give me a second. I have a big bottle here. That's a big bottle of Guerlain Vetiver. I wanted to set it aside because I think my mind was so set on the tobacco that it deserves being an honorable mention, even though it's more associated with vetiver. And we do have a correct answer in the chat. Yes, the 200 ml bottle, and it still smells just spectacular, and it's fresh top notes. And we have an answer, a correct answer, Nikki B. Tabac Blanc from Caron. Here's the eau de parfum of Tabac Blanc. Now, Tabac Blanc is an example of the impression of tobacco without there necessarily being anything in it that screams it. It is the atmosphere of tobacco or cigarette smoking or... Oh, sorry about that. But we have this lovely accord, this base that the perfumer, and bonus points to who can name the perfumer. Nikki, if you know the answer, let's see if somebody else can answer it, because you know your oats, you know your onions, so you probably know what the perfumer is. If somebody knows the perfumer for Tabac Blanc. Oh, yeah, it's a bummer. Yeah, it used to be so affordable to pick up one of those large bottles. I don't even know what the pricing is for Guerlain or in particular the Guerlain masculine line, the men's line. I don't even know. I don't know their pricing structure at all. I haven't bought any new Guerlain in a while. So back to Tabac Blanc. If you look at the notes pyramid of Tabac Blanc, you don't see a tobacco note because everything in it is supposed to give that suggestion. Because at the time, we're also talking about a time where notes pyramids were internal anyways. The consumer was not really looking at a notes pyramid or a notes breakdown. It wasn't really a thing at the time. But it is other things giving that impression, one of them being carnation. So we're thinking of that carnation flower, the spiced, creamy, floral, clove forward, the iris, the ylang ylang, the muskiness, the leatheriness, the quinolines, the base. What is the base? Who was the perfumer, and what is the base that he was known to use in many of these classics from Caron in that time period? Scent of the day, Clou de Ruskies. Andy the Frenchie, 80 to 90 for 100 mil, and the ideal. The idea. Yeah. Yeah, that's much more expensive. Expensive for even discounters. Goodness. That was so different from even 2021. Perfumer of Tabac Blanc. What was the base that he used in Tabac Blanc? Let's see. We know we have some nerds out there. Who? Let's give it a minute, and then Nikki, if you know the answer, I'm just going to let you do it. Give it a minute, though. Anybody know? Perfumer, house perfumer of Caron during this time period, composed Tabac Blanc, used this base. Either or both answers. I should have like a little buzz sound, a little out of time. We're talking about Ernest Daltroff, the perfumer for Tabac Blanc, and he used mousse de Saxe, the mousse de Saxe base. I have a video in my archive on the mousse de Saxe base, and we've had some discussions on that. Good answers, though. Oh, Mishi, maybe you contributed with that answer just before, and there was a little delay. But yes, Ernest Daltroff, Bernard Chant. Good guess. Bernard Chant was probably in diapers at the time when this was composed. One of my favorite perfumers, though. Jean-Claude, another great guess. And I don't have a Germain CA over here, but there are some Germain CA fragrances that are quite evocative of tobacco. And you're absolutely right, Nikki V. Mousse de Saxe. Thank you. So that's the first one. And we're just going to go through some of these here. I'm going to go maybe in chronological order. And it's interesting to me that we have to fast forward a bit before I get to the next one, which was expressed as a favorite. But I do have a soft spot for this one. This is from Roger Gallet. It's this open. Now, for you vintage nerds, if you want me to do all this stuff, like there's no barcode, there's a short ingredients list, all that garbage, it's a vintage. Do you have to get a vintage? Not necessarily. I got a vintage just because I wanted to compare the vintage to modern, and the differences are negligible. Although I will say there's a bit of an increase in the epicene base in open. And an epicene base is used by in a lot of well-known spicy men's fragrances in the 70s and 80s, famously employed by Guy Robert in Equipage. And it's present here as well. There's this open. This is the example of a very dry, spicy, aldehydic tobacco. And I love the bottle. The bottle's an acquired taste, but I love the asymmetry of the bottle. Neat stuff. And I love the fragrance. And I know that maybe those who are a bit critical of the newer bottles might appreciate the older bottle more because of that epicene base. That's open. Moving forward chronologically, I suppose we could continue going forward chronologically. We have another one that is a little bit polarizing for some. This is a newer bottle of it, and also these are all discontinued. I don't know how much this is going for right now. I haven't checked the pricing because I've had this bottle. I've had this bottle since before all of that business started. This is Havana. And Havana is sort of more the 90s version of open, a dried tobacco. And a dried tobacco with a dihydromercenol that's sort of lurking in the background, a dimetol lurking in the background, a little bit of lime freshness going on there. Also that epicene. But I love it. I love it. And it smells nostalgic to me. It's rough around the edges in the most delightful manner. Havana. And I don't recall when this one was released, but I think we're kind of approximating chronologically. This is a Check and Speak. It's Cuba or Cuba. Delightful stuff. This might be the one that I'll spray on this evening because I just can't get enough of this funky stuff. This is bright, dazzling, effervescent. It's not that, but it isn't Tonka. It's not the Tonka tobacco, though. This is definitely a bright, dry, expansive, only mildly sweet tobacco. It has that texture to it. It's granular. It has an interesting sort of contrast between freshness and earthiness. It's lovely stuff. Check and Speak Cuba. This is I think this is the cologne form of it, but I don't really talk too much about concentrations and performance and stuff. It's a buzzkill to me, but if we have to, it performs well for cologne. In case you're interested. Great stuff, though. Oh, it's so nice. And Andy the Frenchie wearing Equipage today. Monsieur Rochard on the other arm. Yes, they're brothers. They're brothers in arms. They are both Guy Robert. And it's like, to me, they're not so similar as to be redundant at all. It's sort of like, it's like when you admire a series of paintings from your favorite artist, and they have a series, and maybe that series is of the same scene but at a different time of the day or night, or using different colors or textures. That's how I kind of feel like with perfumers doing similar fragrances are. It's like they're not necessarily so similar that you're not getting a fulfilling experience out of one versus the other. You get something different, even though there's those similarities. And that's how I feel about Guy Robert and a lot of his creations, including the ones that he did for Hermes and for Rocha. There's still a lot of those Aramis at mom and pop shops in Texas. Good to know in case somebody's looking for them in Texas, or you may have a friend who's looking for a bottle. Maybe you can help them out. Do them a solid, pick up the bottle for them so they don't have to spend the kind of online prices. Yes. Yes. The linearity, sometimes I love linearity, because that's just, it's, once again, I'm going to use an analogy with visual art. Something that's, the minimalism can be so zen and pleasing to the eye. Music is much the same way. The minimalism of a linear scent can be so pleasing even if it's just a one chord that is just beautifully humming for a few hours. I still think that's great. All right, if we are going to commit to the chronological, not really sure when this was released, but this is from I Profumi di Firenze. It's this tobacco. Open it up. And this is another one that is a good impression of tobacco, not a Tonka impression. But it's not full on balls to the wall, chewy, wet, damp, dense, animalic tobacco. This is light and lively and fresh and aromatic and classy. This is tobacco. The citruses, they sing. There's a bergamot that carries that tobacco feel. So I say feel. And the spices and the woods, the sandalwood in the base. Very tasteful, sophisticated, and beautiful simplicity of this one, tobacco. And I have a review of this. You can read it on Base Notes or Fragrantica. Put that back into its home. I think we're up to the 90s. So here we are. Here is Versace The Dreamer. And I was told that it would be important to get the Versace Perfume version of this. It would have to say that on the base. I don't know that for certain because I never tried the newer version of this, but this is an example of clary sage filling in to give that tobacco illusion. To me, this is just as much a clary sage fragrance. And that's not only an opinion. I saw the GCMS of this, it was actually like a breakdown, like the composition. It was a sizable percentage of clary sage, like a pretty good amount of clary sage, like one of the it was the most abundant ingredient in the Dreamer. So this is a perfect example of where that clary sage kind of steps in and plays that role. It is the auteur in this performance, playing the role of the noble tobacco in Versace The the Dreamer. And 90s, 2000s, I don't recall. I didn't write down all of the years that these were released, so we're just kind of loosely. Aqua de Cuba from Santa Maria Novella, which I heard, I don't know for certain, I heard this was discontinued. Can somebody confirm that for me? Holy shit. This is in a league of its own. It's in a league of its own. It is a honeyed, robust, bold, sweaty, virile tobacco. It is just fantastic. Oh my God. It just smells like sex. This is sex tobacco, or tobacco sex, however way you look at it. Profound stuff. And that is as much as I can really say about it. Words escape me right now. As you know, as always, I have written reviews. Fragrantica, base notes, look it up. Alpha Iron on Fragrantica, Colborne on base notes. I expound upon this there. And then this delightful number, very classical in design. It's a more refined direction from the likes of Open and Aramis Havana, taking it in a more niche direction. I put that in quotes because we know there's a little bit of BS behind calling something niche, so I'll put that in quotes. This is the lovely house of Miller Harris, and I think this one was composed by Lynn Harris herself. This is Fille de Tabac, and this is tobacco via spice. It's the spices in this one that carry it through. It is that allspice, the pimento berry, the clove, the nutmeg, the citruses that the spices float in and take it into that heart, and then it dries down with that the musky, woody, sort of vaguely tobacco kind of feel. And I think it's just so pleasant, such a joy to wear. Old formulation, of course, indeed. That's the tip that was given to me, and I ran with it. Got an older formulation bottle. Didn't set me back much, so I was like, why not? Spray. I like to spray it in the air. Yeah, you could. Who says that there's a right or wrong way to wear or use fragrance? You don't even have to wear it. Spray it on something and enjoy it. You don't even have to put it on your body. Spray it in the air. Some people use fragrances as just a way to aromatize the air, like an air freshener. Thanks, Nikki. I appreciate it. This is a Pendleton. I think that this is supposed to be sort of like Inuit, or it could be. I'm a little ignorant on what this is supposed to represent, but there's these beautiful masks. There's great linear, and there's also not so great linear. Yeah, that's a good point. Andy says, I own Tobacco by Odori. Is it the same? I'm not familiar with that one, my friend. I have not tried that one. Okay. Do I have a GCMS? No, I don't have one of those. It's some expensive stuff. But I do. There are some great Instagram accounts that you can follow. One is Fragrance Drama. They've been known to put up compositions, and I can't, the name escapes me. I wish I was more prepared for this, but there's another great Instagram that does post the compositions that have been released to the public as public domain, I think, or maybe they've been stolen. I don't know where they get the, and then they have some GCMS, and so there's access to this information online. And it all depends on your own knowledge to kind of figure out if it seems legit or if it seems some kind of suspect. But with the Dreamer, though, when I looked at it, I mean, I knew that there was a lot of clary sage in it. So just kind of like that, well, that makes sense. Make sure to copyright Tobacco Sex, or Tom Ford will seriously do that. Oh, God. That's funny. With enough coffees, JJ will be able to buy his own GCMS. That's right, Paroli. Thank you. Just a reminder to folks that I have a buy me a coffee option, and I'll share it here. This is the pinned comment. You don't have to buy six if you don't want to, or 12. But if you do buy 6 cups, you do get a sample pack, and I have a lot of samples. I have a surplus, and there's a lot of good stuff too, because I get multiple samples of things that I end up falling in love with, and I have samples to share of some of those things. 12 cups will get you 4 full bottles in a grab bag. They are wild cards though. You can't request what it is, but I will put them in there. These are doubles, and these are things that I must let go, and these things will need a better home than what I can give because I have far too many fragrances. So I can give you 4 full bottle grab bag and a sample pack if you purchase 12 cups. Each cup is $5. You could just send me 1 cup of coffee if you feel like you want to contribute, but you're a little tight on money. I get it. The inflation is crazy right now, so I understand. But if you would like to have an exciting sample pack, and I'll fill that to the brim with samples, have some bottles from my collection, and I'm not giving away garbage. The garbage I end up selling, or I just try to I'll just give it to an antique shop if it's like I can't get rid of them. But I'll give you some good stuff. And we've had a lot of folks who have purchased these deals, and I've gotten a lot of great feedback from them. So that's your way of contributing. 6 cups for a sample pack, 12 cups for a 4 full bottle grab bag, plus a sample pack. US only, please, because like I said, expensive things are expensive. Shipping is expensive outside of the US, unfortunately. I wish I could send outside of the US, but it's just US at this time. If you don't mind, or you can we can arrange something else. I don't know. I just feel so bad that I'm limiting it to the US, but I have no choice but to do that right now. Okay. All right, next. We're getting there. I think what I should do is grab a Serge Lutens. Serge Lutens Shaggy. Shaggy was one of the first Serge Lutens fragrances that I had sampled. Way back in 2007, I walked into a Barney's, New York, in the Prudential Center, Boston. No, it was Copley Plaza, actually, in Boston. No, wait, Copley Plaza. No, it was Prudential. Barney's was in Prudential. And I was greeted by this display of these monolithic bottles. They had the older label at the time. And a delightful woman who was so kind as to discuss the brand with me, have me sample some things, gave me suggestions, and sent me on my way with a grip of samples, sample vials. One of them was Ambre Satin. Another was Arabi, and then there was Cèdre, and then there was Rousse, and then the fifth one was Chergui. And Chergui is a perfect example of that juxtaposition, that adjacency between hay and tobacco. To me, this is just as much an impression of hay as it is tobacco. I'm fairly certain there is a large quantity of hay absolute in this as well, and it has become a classic, one of the better sellers of Serge Lutens. And it is near and dear to me because I've had such a long history with it. And there is another from Serge Lutens, released around the same time, I do believe. Now it is in a glacial, and that is Perfumery. Perfumery is like a little bit hazier and dirtier and a little more than the Chergui, because it's a little bit more fleshed out with some muskiness and dryness, and there's almost like a depraved quality to it. I don't really want to say urinous because I don't want to get the impression that it does smell like pee, but there's like a little bit of kind of like a little bit of what's that? Very nice stuff though. I'll be doing a review of this. I have not done a written review of it yet, but in the near future, I will be posting a review of it. That sweater looks like a Northwest totem pole. Yeah, I think that might be the impression. Might be their intention was. Danny Anctil. I love the tobacco and Mugler Quiem Petinant from Jean-Christophe Hérault. And Andy the Frenchie, second round. CNS Cuba on one arm and Ranja J. Tiabanero on the other. How do you find the modern Cherokee negligible? Differences are negligible. Don't worry about it. Don't listen to what other people say. If you've already smelled it and you like it, go with it. I've compared older bottle with newer bottle. It really there isn't anything to fuss about. Really, there isn't. Lots of Tonka and Cherokee. That's a good example of a Tonka overload because you have those other aggressive, hey, countryside kind of elements to it to prevent it from being kind of cloy. So it is an example of Tonka, Tonka tobacco, Tonka tobacco that I can appreciate. Yes, it is just ish, like not not offensively, but just that little smidgen of something where it's like, oops, I got a little too excited, got a little too hyper. Love the delicate nature. There is a delicate nature to it. It's not balls to the wall. And there is that kind of that translucency to it um, that belies its some substantivity. It's still, I love when perfumes kind of fool you into thinking they're wispy. There's body. Rolly says, I get chamomile tea with fresh tobacco and Perfumery Turk. Chamomile too, and the chamomile, that's another one where it's like a little bit of a uh-oh there too. I love chamomile in a fragrance. Definitely, rustic, flowers, a little bit of pee. I'm glad that I'm in predominantly good company here. We're not a typical YouTube fragrance channel. We can appreciate these things like the musty and the pee and all the other kind of stuff that otherwise to the regular normal world would sound really gross and offensive in perfume. But we know that there is appeal in these unusual characteristics of fragrance. Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, and if anyone can confirm that the sound is okay, we had a Regis Moncton here, the Regis Moncton, our good friend Regis, mentioned that there may be something wrong with the microphone. If somebody can just confirm that the sound is okay, if anybody else can chime in, maybe it is just endemic to him. Okay, excellent. All right. So if anybody can let me know if where the sound kind of dropped out, I can kind of reiterate what I was chatting about. It was pretty much about how the dirty, icky things to the rest of the normal world have their appeal to us fragrance nuts because we just love, you know, all those sort of nuances. Nuge, great to see you. Glad that you could stop by. Thank you for confirming. Thank you. Great. I'm so glad. We have like a little over half. Well, I'm going to run probably a little bit over 2 hours because I haven't gone through all the tobacco fragrances here. We have 27 people who are tuned in at the moment. But yes, the muskiness, the dankness, a little bit of pee pee, a little bit of poo poo, a little bit of secretions. That's why something like Secretion Magnifique came into existence. I mean, it was bold, but there's an audience for it. So, and that it can be present in a lot of tobacco fragrances, a little bit of that dirtiness, a little bit of that animalic and that sweaty and that, I mean, I'm at a loss of words. It's just kind of a little dirty. Ooh, patchy. Ooh. Okay. Give me 1 second. We'll adjust that. Okay. Let's check something here. Okay. Okay, so I adjusted the volume of the music, and is that better? And just confirm if that is sounding a little bit better. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Great. Okay. Moving right along. We did our Serge Lutens. Let's move on to this lovely number, which is from the house of Eau d'Italie, Les Cyrillos Positano. It's Bois d'Ambly, and this is composed by Bertrand Duchaufour. And this is where we steer into damp tobacco territory. Damp, dank, chewy, moist. I know some people don't like that word. I don't mind it. I think it's a good descriptor, but some people have an aversion to it. So forgive me. Um, and this is very much ooh, 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 yes, yes, yes. And that can be damp smelling, that fresh rolling tobacco that there's that moisture in it. Mm. And there's an interesting note of, um, I believe calamus oil. If anybody has not had the pleasure of smelling calamus oil from calamus root, it would it I would recommend that you try calamus because it's so unique. It has like these weird bready qualities, these sweet, um, kind of like maple-ish, but also liquor-y kind of, just hard to explain. And it's here too. This is definitely a more raw and fulginous kind of, it's just one of a kind. And this is one of my favorite compositions from Bertrand Duchaufour. Um, it kind of reminds me of like a marsh as well. It's almost like the aroma of tobacco while in a marsh. Does that sound appealing? I don't know. It sounds appealing to me. Lovely, lovely stuff. I think it's still in production in a different bottle from this. Used to be in a more conic, cylindrical bottle, and then they moved on to these rectangular bottles, and now they're in a new kind of presentation. Or I could be wrong, Andy. If you can confirm, it has this been discontinued? That'd be really unfortunate because it's stellar. 29 people who are tuned in. Lovely to have everybody here. Okay, rounding things off. Ooh, lesser known. And if we're talking about some of that animalic, dirty, sex between the sheets, kind of like, oh, a little bit of something kind of leaked and exuded itself and all that kind of stuff. There's an Aperture, Le Flam, New York, Aperture. This is tobacco via ambergris, pepper. I believe that there's an animalis in here or costas. Wild stuff. I mean, people talk about musks Kublai Khan and other animalics being utter beasts, but this is a stealth beast. This one sneaks up on you and says, "You're mine." Intense. It's just so good. The best from the house by far. I mean, there's some great fragrances from the house. Um, not too many groundbreaking things, not too many things that are, setting the world on fire. This is the one everybody either they don't know about it, they avoid it, they don't know what to do about it, they don't know what to make out of it. I fucking love it. It's Aperture from Erlecalan. Reviewing for Grantica bass notes. I'm better with writing than I am with speaking. I hold my own speaking, but When you get me sitting down and writing about perfume, it all comes out. So just read the review for Aperture. Andy actually has great reviews as well for Aperture, from what I recall, and Bois d'Ambry, a great reviewer in his own right. So you should read his as well, for sure. Yes. Yeah, yeah. There's some similarities to Zing as well. Yeah, I love Costas. I am planning to in February early March. I'm going to do a video on Costas and fragrances that that showcase it, whether deliberately or not. They're Costas is just there. I was just wearing Cuir Maresque from Serge Lutens, and I was just so struck today when wearing it that the Costas is underneath all of that sheldrake, um, dry, stewed, whatever kind of fruit kind of stuff, and the IBQ kind of leather that this Costas comes out. I was just struck by it. I'm like, "Ooh, it's sexy." Regis asks, "Do you mind talking about how tobacco is used in certain soap scent profiles? For example, honey and lilac and Irish spring." Well, I didn't really have that on the agenda, and I have a few more of these fragrances here. I'm not really equipped to discuss the soap scent profiles. It's not really something that I've really explored. However, it is worth looking into. I'd be fascinated with how tobacco comes into play with these classic soap scents. Personally, I'm a fan of Dial. I'm talking about Animalis, Conquitone. The core of Dial soap actually is that, surprisingly. Like, that's why when I wear Kiehl's Original Musk, I'm sometimes reminded of Dial soap. Yeah, it'd be exciting. And you know what? It's unprecedented. I'm fairly certain there's no other video on YouTube that discusses Costas. So, is it a panty dropper? Depends on whose panties you're trying to drop. Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. I love writing. Writing is that's my comfort zone. I kind of fake it till I make it when I'm rambling on here, but I'd love to write. I got a similar feeling with Pistol like Costa. That's one. Hey, spoiler alert. That's going to be one of them I'll be discussing actually. The cost of serving a canvas underneath everything. It's wild how it underpins, how it really it gives this sort of body and flesh and substance. It prevents a fragrance from just sort of floating away. It is the corpus of a lot of fragrances. Yeah, the original. I'm talking about that orange dial soap. Yeah, thank you, Claire. I appreciate that. We have a few more here. We're getting closer. We're at the home stretch. Tabac Tabou, one of my favorite tobacco fragrances. Tabac Tabou from Parfum d'Empire, Marc-Antoine Corticchiaro, one of my favorite perfumers. I'm finally getting used to pronouncing his last name correctly. Mmm. Tabac Tabou, we were discussing this earlier. Andy had mentioned it, that this does have those natural tobacco absolutes. And I do think it has like fluve in it as well. I'm convinced. Could be wrong, but I feel convinced. And Narcissus Absolute, and that horsey, chrysolic, barnyard, you know, down on the farm kind of craziness that you can get from like that thick smelling Narcissus. It's like this is different from the Narcissus of you just putting your nose in it and getting those nuances. It's laid on thick here, and there's just a muskiness and a real refinement to it, though. He's just so good at putting these things together. Um, and Andy does make a good point. And Fujir Bengal, I like it. It isn't. I didn't fall head over heels for it. I like it, but when you're a crazy collector of fragrances and you have them all sitting around waiting to be appreciated, and they're like, "Wear me, wear me." I have to draw the line somewhere, and I was like, I like it a lot, but I didn't get a bottle of it. Tobacco Taboo, however, yes. But I do agree that this isn't. If you wanted your first signature tobacco fragrance, like one that this is tobacco, this wouldn't be the first one. This shouldn't be the first one. I wouldn't recommend this one first. This is for those who are looking to take a walk on the wild side a little bit, but I love it. And then we have the sadly discontinued fragrance from Aramis, Tobacco Reserve. And Tobacco Reserve is another example of where we have that clary sage that is supporting everything else in its orbit. It is playing the role of tobacco. And it is also another example of that coumarin or that tonka also playing a big part in it as well, without it being too sweet and too powdery. And it's been discontinued. It's probably, I guess, a unicorn now. I don't know how much this is going for. I don't want to overhype it. I don't like doing that. I feel icky. Um, but if you are patient and persevere and have this as sort of like a saved search somewhere on some sort of site like eBay, Mercari, fill in the blank, maybe you'll be fortunate enough to find a bottle for this for, under 150 bucks, even though it was selling for so cheap, but it was still in production. And people didn't know, how good they had it by having these stick around. And I was really pushing to get people to get it because I had a feeling it just wasn't going to stick around. I feel like these things don't stick around for a while. They're not commercially successful and they'll disappear. And last but not least, Atmanzaman from Lorenzo Villoresi, one of my favorite perfumers. Lorenzo, this is the Eau de Parfum. I have the Eau de Toilette as well. I'm usually not that crazy where I'm getting both, but in this case, I did. And I'm going to probably do one more spray tonight, and it will be this one. Quenching. That's the word that comes to mind. It's quenching. And as we were talking a little bit about it earlier, this fragrance has the immortelle that fuses the tobacco together and all the other elements. Great usage of immortelle. And I feel like Lorenzo also used tobacco absolute in this as well. This is a denser, chewier, damper, juicier kind of tobacco. You have those fenugreek aspects from the immortelle, not so much the maple. Some people get the maple. Here, I feel like the fenugreek kind of is a little bit more forward. If you're not familiar with fenugreek does have a certain sweet, resinous, cumin without the BO kind of smell to it, with a little bit of that maple undertone, for lack of a better explanation. Gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. This is one of my favorites out of all of the tobaccos. One of my favorites from Lorenzo Villoresi, that is Atmanzaman. And those are the ones that I set aside, but of course I could dig into more. I could take more out. We could talk about how Habanita was from Molinard was a tobacco concept in itself, even though it doesn't really give tobacco. It is a tobacco concept in some ways. We could talk about Polo, the original Polo Green. We could think of another one that was, the concept of tobacco, the idea of tobacco without it being tobacco in the classics like Mora and Wirtz, Tabac, the original Tabac, the soapy, aromatic, barbershoppy feel of that. There's a lot. So back to the chat here. We're going to stick around for just a little while longer. The taboo part, yes. Oh yeah, that's the taboo and tobacco taboo. Probably doesn't, but that's the thing too. Is When we look at notes, just because we don't see the note doesn't mean that any one type of material or something that would be put together for an accord isn't there. So there's a lot of examples of that. And there are some instances where it's like, why isn't it listed as a note? Or is that a deliberate decision not to list the note? Um, so that would be that we could flesh out a whole live stream to talk about note pyramids. And also, let's talk about how a lot of reviewers, and influencers lean on the notes list like a little way too much, like just a little too much, and they're not just spelling notes. They're relying so much on that information, and sometimes it's good just to set it aside for a while, just approach it with a blank slate and see what you get out of it, and then compare it with the information that is at your disposal. Okay, all right, fair enough. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's disappointing. Disappointing that tobacco reserve is so hard to obtain now. But like I said, if it's something that really you love tobacco, you're willing to spend a little extra on something discontinued that used to be a lot cheaper. You have the money for it. Not everybody does. Then do a save search and see if it comes up, and you never know. A lot of the things that I get, I try not to make it an impulse purchase because I could spend a lot more than I really need to, especially with vintages. Like I give it months and months until I find like a deal. Like for instance, recently I picked up a bottle of Filius or Filius. Pardon the mispronunciation, if there is one, from Nina Ricci. And I was looking at the prices. Like I'm not spending 300, $400 for an atomizer bottle, And I had like a mini, and the mini was good enough for me for a while. And I kept it as a save search on eBay. And then an Italian seller came up with it. And they were selling it for, $150 plus shipping. So the shipping's a little bit more, but it's a 4-ounce bottle, or 100 something milliliters for those who use metric. And I waited 3 years until I bounced on a good deal. And that's how you do it. And then you also just sort of, let go of the attachment to wanting it too. And then when you let go of that attachment and just set it aside, then you might be pleasantly surprised sometime in the future to find it for a good price blowing your wad, rather than blowing your wad, so to speak, of cash, just because it is in demand. And I'm talking about all the Balenciaga people, Balenciaga, that whole craze, and you name it, Iquitos, and what are some others that, they went through the hype machine, and then people are like, Petit Boron, like some of it is really worth it. Tobacco reserve, is it worth it? If you are a huge tobacco fiend and you want to smell like a really good quality, like more modern tobacco, I would say don't spend more than 150 bucks on it. If you're just seeing it for more than that, just forget about it. It's just not worth spending that kind of money. Are you talking about Tobacco Reserve? Yeah, it has like a kind of wild, like almost like it looks like reminiscence patchouli now. Like it's like a deep sepia kind of color. Mm, floral to a degree, but once again, concept. The concept. If you know the concept of it was meant to be sprayed on cigarettes. So it was a tobacco concept, not necessarily tobacco fragrance. Agner Explosive. Agner Explosive is your way of experiencing a sensational green rose chypre without having to, once again, blow your wad of cash on Gucci. Just as good and a lot cheaper. Nick S says I have that issue with florals as notes all the time as a gardener. Phileas is such a delight with that yet again vibe combined with the ripe jasmine note. Yes, it's a much more floral, brighter. Um, I love Yatagan as well. Yatagan is always going to be one of my favorites, but I loved it. And what I was talking about earlier about these variations on a theme and how a perfumer can approach a same theme and then put their own signature on it. I hate using the word DNA, but having their injecting their own DNA. Oh my god, that sounds kind of gross. But imparting their own style into it, and I think that's what happened in the case of this. And yeah, three, 3.5 years before I found a bottle that I felt like, okay, this is a good price. That's how you do it. You know, you see people who amass a collection in a short period of time. You're like, where the hell did this guy come from? And all of a sudden they become an expert on vintages and stuff, and they're just blowing their wads of cash and showing off their bottles and stuff. And it's like, man, like slow your roll, be careful. I mean, I hate the idea of having to pay down credit card debt just because, like, I couldn't, resist myself. It's just slow and steady, and take your time, and be, particular about how what you add to your collection, because you know it's not worth it to spend the hundreds and hundreds of dollars that people are asking on some of this stuff. Yeah, and Tobacco Reserve, that's how much I spent. It was like 35 bucks. Yeah. And yes, I don't have a big dent on it, but I have a huge collection. I have a big dent in many things, unless it's a dent that already existed because it was a lower fill. But I own it. Absolute filth. Great. All right. The time is now 8:57 p.m. We're approaching 2 hours on the Tobacco Notes and Accord stream. We have 20 people tuned in. Once again, for those who may be interested, we do still have that offer. Buy me a coffee, $5 a coffee. If you buy 6 cups, you get a sample pack from yours truly. 12 cups gets you a 4 full bottle grab bag plus a sample pack. US only, please. It's in the pinned comment. It has a link right there. Easy peasy. And we do have a starred comment from earlier from Andy that of course, I forgot about it until now. And of course, I did the wrong thing by unstarring it, and now it's lost within the mix. Not supposed to do that with starred comments. So, Andy, forgive me. I don't want to just spend my time like digging for that comment. If you can remember the comment that I starred, I think it was sort of like it was sort of a tangent from the discussion. Ooh, I think this is it. Later on, could you tackle the tobacco flower white tobacco accord that Sharon likes to use in a couple of his fragrances, Boudica Woad? Yeah. What do we think of the idea of the smell of opium? Like, I love Boudica Woad. Boudica Woad is like, that's psychedelic shit. That stuff is surreal. Like, it's really good stuff, but it is like, your brain is trying to, your brain has so many different uh, reference points for what is natural, what is synthetic, what is real, what is surreal, what is. It's interesting what he conveyed in that. It's almost like postmodernism, but in a good way. But as far as the scent of opium, I have to be really honest. Like, I can't tell you. I couldn't describe what the smell of opium is. Um, I vaguely recall maybe reading about how the smell is supposed to be at one point or another, but I don't think the whole concept wrapped me enough to, when I was doing my perfume making experimentations to like pursue that idea. And Gizashin has covered it for me, anyways. Through Boudica Wand. And tobacco flowers, I've smelled them. They're beautiful. Subtle smelling flowers. It's almost kind of like they have that subtlety that phlox would have. That phlox smell. If you ever smell like Dane's Rocket or phlox, it has that kind of similar quality to it, with a little bit of more of that je ne sais quoi, that kind of almost. I don't know if it's just sort of like the power of suggestion, but it's a tobacco plant, so it kind of smells tobacco-y, or it could just be the fact that the scent profile has marinade. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that was helpful. Let's get back to the chat again. Scroll back down. And Nick S says he loves the tobacco flower and Alt Innsbruck cologne. That's one I haven't tried either. Very futuristic for sure. Yeah. And I recall, I mean, I never encountered the bottle, the original version of it, that it would spray like a blue liquid that would fade on your skin. Um, I just have the blue bottle, but kind of neat stuff. Shan is an interesting perfumer. I like that he pushes the envelope as far as experimental perfume and using, you know, synthetics in really exciting ways. I mean, he's a bit hit or miss. Some of his stuff, I'm kind of a little put off. Like, I don't know about that. I don't know. I don't know if I can deal with that kind of synthetic. But sometimes I'm really captivated by what he does. Another impression of tobacco flower is AC Tobacco Nuit. So much stuff that I still haven't smelled. I'm telling you, I friggin' have almost 1,000 full bottles in my library of fragrance, my museum of effing fragrances. There's still things that I haven't smelled. And it's just like, I got to be okay with that. Just, I haven't smelled that one either. Ah, Bali Masculin. You did. Oh, I hope you didn't spend an arm and a leg on it. Duncan, how much did you spend on that? Please tell me you didn't spend like 300 bucks on it. It just pains me when people spend so much money. I think I waited for about a year before that came up, and I spent 150 on mine. It's nice though. That's a nice one. That's an obscurity, as they say. And it doesn't look like I have any coffees, unfortunately. I was trying to aim for maybe, I don't know, 5 coffees. So if you want to buy a coffee, $5 each. Just use the link in the pinned comment. I did get a video. I did get an email from Clandestine Laboratories, Mark Sage, my man Mark. Um, and I did get a TikTok notification, not high priority. What are you guys' thoughts on TikTok? TikTok. That's like a whole offshoot of TikTok that is not worthy of discussion right now. TikTok, fragrance influencers. What do you think of them? I want to hear your comments on TikTok fragrance influencers. Oh, Regis, yes. How many samples in a sample pack? I give like 15, 20 sometimes. Um, how much do you want? How much are you expecting? I'm negotiable. I mean, seriously, 2,000. And my reviews are, I'm approaching 1,000 for reviews as well. And my goal is to kind of like, once I reach a little over 1,000, I'm going to kind of slow it down a little bit because it's going to be but I'm like one of those people. I always aim for these goals. Like I'm gonna reach this, and then that's gonna be my cutoff. I'm gonna like slow it down there. I think a little over 1,000 is gonna be enough. I don't want to be one of those zany people who has 5,000 reviews. How are they able to do that? But so much to discover. It's just like you have to tell yourself, like, I'm okay where I am. I'm just gonna enjoy. I'm gonna just drink in and relish everything that I already have as much as I can, even though what I have is multiple lifetimes worth. And then just to be a little bit more discriminating about what you choose to sample. And another thing that I noticed now that I've sampled and experience so much is that you have the same tropes and themes kind of circling back, and it's like, oh, it's another one of these. That's nice. Okay, all right, their version of this. Okay, all right, not blowing my mind. It's not knocking my socks off. It's come okay. And then after a while, you're just kind of like, yeah, yeah, all right. It's got to be like a really unusual, interesting concept. One fragrance that I picked up recently, which is blowing my mind right now, is actually from Prada. It's from their Olfactories exclusive series, and incidentally, it's the only Prada in my collection, and it's called Marienbad. and I can't wait to write a review on this because it reminds me like the dry down. It's so good. Dry down reminds me exactly of the incense smell of the head shop that was at this kind of mini mall place called the Garage in Cambridge here in Massachusetts. And I used to go to Harvard Square, Cambridge. There was a garage. They had a Newbery Comics, they had a pizza place, they had like a Tibetan place, head shop, and this smell takes me back to 1995 when I was in high school and going to the garage and being cool with my Manic Panic blue hair and my thrift shop clothing, and I'm just smitten with it. And that one is a unique one to me. I've never smelled that exact like it's that is what really satisfies me now. If a fragrance can do that, that can actually be that transportive. And a lot of fragrances can be nice and enjoyable to wear and well made, but are they transportive? And I think over time, maybe a little bit more refinement in my hobby, that the transportive fragrances will be the ones that will continue to resonate for long periods of time. Something to think about. Ah, yeah. Ah, impressive, neurotic, a little bit of a problem. You can decide. I'm glad that Nick, you think that it's impressive. Now it's fair to say I've never smelt that before. Everything seems to be an updated version of something already existing. It's true. And then like when I hear like hyped up stuff like that Celine brand, and like, oh, it's Celine, and the bottles are 350, $400. This is haute perfumery. And I smelled it, and I'm like, this shit is just like derivative Chanel kind of exclusives done kind of not as good. And there was so much hype over it. And that happens so much. And it's like, is there more of is there more of this fetishism for the consumer product being exclusive and luxury, and and are we given into that myth that there really are many more naturals and a lot more skill and artistry in them than something that is less expensive? Like this phenomenon, it's kind of wearing on me, you know? And I mean, I know I just mentioned a Prada olfactories, but you know, of course I bought that, you know, under the retail price anyways. I try to do that all the time. We all know the gray market is the way to go. Not many of us are that wealthy. Um, but the obsession, the exalting, of exclusive lines from designer houses, it just seems like really missing the forest for the trees when it comes to perfume as a whole. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'd like your feedback. I do have some Chanel Liz exclusives. I don't think that they're all mind blowing. Some of them are, to me, quite derivative as well. You know, Chanel Boy, nice, but how many degrees away from Capone Polonom is that really? You know, like how much more satisfying is it to spend 10 times the amount on that when it doesn't seem to be 10 times the value or quality? I have to put quality in quotation marks as well because that's something to unpack as well. What does it mean to be quality? You know? So I think it's wise to take all this noise and all these people on YouTube and Fragrantica and Base Notes and Instagram. Take what they say with a grain of salt. I know that I'm just as guilty as anybody else to contribute to the FOMO, but I always like to preface by saying, you know, like your mileage might vary. If you can't afford this, don't buy it. You know, like it gauge where you are in your perfume journey as a collector and wearer and figure out if it makes sense to you. And don't give into the pressure of feeling like, you know, you're a serious connoisseur of perfume. In order to be a serious connoisseur of perfume, you need to have XYZ and then show it off. Because I've been down that road. And, you know, in the end, like, I feel like I just spent more money than I needed to. And, like, am I really impressed? It's not really that important in the end. So I guess this is the philosophical part of the stream, the philosophical coda of our notes and accord stream. I'm going to get back to the chat here. Clear, the Prada is called Marienbad, and it is based on, if I'm not mistaken, a book. Pardon my ignorance. I have so much shit floating in my head. I can get back to you on that. But it's Marienbad, Marienbad, from the olfactory series from Prada. Not quite Nag Champa though. This is so specific, and maybe there's some of that, but it is, to me, it transported me to a very specific smell in a very specific place, and now it has a very personal meaning to me. And oh my god, hopefully, Oda Jerks doesn't use that. And a little bit of a belch there. There might be another edit from There Will Be Ashes, who's a big fan of mine on that subreddit. Nick S says, it's such a peculiar but satisfying feeling finding a smell from your past in a new fragrance. Isn't it so? It's so strange. It's like, and it almost is like this weird kind of like serendipity of some type. Like I'm going to take you back to it, like a certain time and place that you were very fond of, and it's going to just fill you up with memories. It's wild stuff. Total FOMO up the wazoo. And I do want to just try to temper that FOMO and just give good advice as well. Like, don't be reckless about it. Don't be reckless, you know? Sample it, see if you like it. Sampling first has saved me a lot of money too. You know, people are talking up some stuff. You know, I gotta sample it first, and more often than not, I'm like, yeah, it's all right. I don't understand why people think it's the second coming. Marion Bad, yes. Oh, great, helping out the chat there. Tripler, smoke 'em 'cause I got 'em. Mm, 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 mm. You missed out on some great discussion on tobacco, raw materials, natural and synthetic, and a whole suite of tobacco fragrances. We're at 9:13 right now. I'm going to check to see if we have any buy me a coffees, any coffees coming in, because I don't really go too long after 2 hours without the coffees. And this is a standard in the live stream world, time is money in a certain way. I get tired. I want to entertain and inform and enlighten, but you know, I don't want it to seem too transactional, but a lot of us do this, and a lot of larger channels who have live streams, they get the super chats or they get the buy me a coffee. I try not to be too pushy about it, though. It's not the end of the world. It's not my primary reason for being here because I have a full-time job as well, which is why I can only do these things about once a week. Which, speaking of, next week, we have an effluvium on Tuesday, January 30th. We have Sam from the YouTube channel My World of Fragrance. The time is to be announced, but we do have her as our guest next week. And then the following week, I will be doing a video on coniferous fragrances. That means pine, fir, spruce, cypress, larch. What else is there? Am I forgetting some? Hemlock. Coniferous fragrances. I'm going to be doing a video, probably a top 10 because, YouTube algorithms seem to work. It's not because I'm trying to do what everybody else is doing. I just would like to have more people see what I'm doing. And that's how YouTube works. You have to rely on algorithms, and that's why some people have this is not a top 10, because it still says this is a top 10 even if you don't say it's a top 10, and the algorithm recognizes that and will send your video out into the universe, the YouTube universe, for people to discover. Not to be left. Yes, a baby super chat. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. I owe you. I owe you. You're a good guy, and always a pleasure to chat with. We'll be in touch. Maybe I'll send you. Can I send you a sample pack? Are you outside the U.S.? I don't know. I owe you though. You're a good guy. Did I get it for a good price? I got it for 200. I think the retail is more expensive, but that was a splurge. Yeah, I got it for 200. But it is available on eBay. There's some being sold on eBay. Pat Lister, curious, JJ, have you ever smelled real tobacco leaf, whether it's fresh cured or fermented? I have. Very different scent profile with a fresh leaf. Cured leaf is the characteristic tobacco leaf smell, cured or fermented. And I've been in numerous tobacco shops that smell all different sorts of tobaccos, loose tobacco. And it's always just a feast for the senses to go into a tobacco shop. Not many of them around these days. There is a wonderful tobacco shop in Harvard Square in Cambridge. Um, the name escapes me. Go figure. Middle age setting in. I can't remember the name of it, but it's been there for 100 years or something like that. Yeah. Enjoy the archive. The archive will be up, and you can listen to all the good, juicy, tasty tobacco stuff for the first 2 hours. Yeah. Sam next week. Coniferous perfumes the week after that. We have Saskia Wilson Brown. We're still confirming a date, but she'll be on an effluvium coming up. Saskia Wilson Brown was one of the founders of the Institute of Art and Olfaction, so we'll have her too. Does she recommend Fianagi? Well, Fianagi will definitely be giving a mention during the video. Davidoff in London is always worth a visit. Nice. I recall some YouTuber, and they were talking about a Davidoff fragrance, and somebody asked about their favorite Davidoff tobacco, and they had no idea. Bless his heart. I just remember that. And I found it a little amusing. And a little bit of Schadenfreude, I guess. A lot of people on YouTube are talking a lot about fragrances, but you catch them off guard and you kind of detour just a little bit, and they'll be caught with their pants down. All right, 9:18. I don't know if I'm going to be running too much longer. Thank you so much, Regis. It's much appreciated. Always great to see you in the chat. You're most welcome. I also may want to, or will want to mention, may want to. I don't think it's something I need to debate. The future notes and accords. So next month, it was decided by viewers that it will be animalics. So we're going to be doing the same concept, notes and accords, animalics next month. And then March will be rose. We're going to be doing rose in March. And then in April, I'm going to be combining violet as in the flower. Maybe we'll do a little bit of the leaf as well because it's germane. Violet and iris together. I'm going to do that in April. And then I'll be working on what the future ones will be at some point in the future. Not a problem, my friend. Great to see you, Darren. A very talented and spectacular artist in the indie perfume world, our friend Darren Allen Perfumes. Great to see you as well. Be sure to check out the archive. It was a great discussion in tobacco. Thank you so much, Fernando. I appreciate it. Stick around for just a minute or two more here. It's nice to have the Kuba. I'm going to check and speak Kuba on the right arm. And lovely Atman Zaman on the left arm. Does Darren have one that features a lot of tobacco? Darren, do you use any, or well, not necessarily, I mean, do you use tobacco or do you put together tobacco chords in any of your work? We're curious. Will Animalis 1745 be mentioned in the Animalix video? As a matter of fact, it will be. And I have two different types of animalis. And I'll be talking about Tonquitone, Shangri-Lide, the Costuses, all the natural animal materials as well. I'll even show my genuine piece of New Zealand ambergris. All right. I think this is now as good a time as any to wrap up this stream. But once again, stay tuned. Next week, we will have Sam from My World of Fragrance. Wonderful YouTube channel. Great content. Highly recommended. She's going to be joining me and Rachel next week. So until then, everybody be well and take care.